this is a amazing event. And this is almost never done before. And I got a lot of good feedback from people who are really encouraged by this. And I would like to thank very much our three distinguished guests for making it possible. And of course, this is only possible because also our Lily, who is the driving force behind it. And a thank you for our host, Monica, and our whole team here, which made this event possible today. So without further ado, I just let me welcome everybody. And I'm sure that we're going to have a very, very good learning experience this afternoon.
Thank you, Hai-Pei. Thank you to our fearless leader at UCA. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Hardy Lee, who is the sponsor for the project. Hardy, if I may ask you to speak a few words and introduce our keynote speakers today.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the Chinese Friendship Association of Portland, I'm honored to introduce the two distinguished keynote speakers today. Mary C. Curtis is a columnist at Roll Call, is an award-winning journalist and educator based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. She is the host of the CQ Roll Call podcast called Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis. She has contributed to NBC News, NPR, The Washington Post, The Root, ESPN's The Undefeated, and talks politics on WCCB TV and NCR-affiliated WFAE in Charlotte. Curtis also has worked at the New York Times, the Charlotte Observer, the Baltimore Sun, and Associated Press, and was national correspondent for AOL's Politics Daily. And our next keynote speaker, Melissa Green. Melissa Green is the Deputy Director for Communications for Clinical Scholars, a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation program. Melissa began her career providing technical assistance to health department and community-based organizations in North Carolina. Her public health practice and research focus is health equity and collaboration between communities and academic institutions. Her research interests include health disparities across the cancer continuum, peer support interventions, disease prevention, and factors that influence participation in health research. Thank you very much for our two great speakers today.
Thank you, Hardy. Hardy has been a long supporter of the UCA program. And let me segue into Mary Curtis. And Mary, the podium is yours.
Thank you all so much. This is so needed. I really don't have to talk to you why, because you know with what's going on right now, that all voices need to be heard, particularly those that have been underrepresented. And I know that the next speaker is going to talk more about the why, but I just want to hit you with a few points. One, if you do not put your thoughts into the world in the form of public scholarship and public leadership, you will not be thought of as a leader. Also, as we all know, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And I don't have to say they probably will get it wrong. Also, everyone here wants to be a part of the solution. And if you're not a part of the conversation, it's very difficult to be part of the solution. And if you want to know what impact you can have, you only need to turn to Lily and Luca, who will be coming up as panelists, who can tell you what has happened as a result of their thought leadership. So I want to get a little bit into the how and just sort of the elements of persuasion. How do you change minds? We have 2 live edits that we're going to do. And I want to briefly first go over some of the elements of persuasion. And I will be bringing up some of these terms when I am live editing. So I want you to be familiar with them. I have to start out by saying there is no single way to make an argument. And if you have a better way, by all means, do it your way. I like to think of these elements like a recipe, ingredients that can be rearranged and mixed up in different ways. We all know that when you have the ingredients on a sheet of paper, you put your own personal touches on it. So please realize this is not a prescription. These are just some suggestions, but you want to put your own flavor to it. Now, when you have an op-ed, the first thing you start off with is the lead. That is the lead of it. And the purpose of it is the first line. And the purpose is to grab someone's attention because no one owes you their attention. And in the world now, we have so many things from Twitter to TikTok to TV and cable news that's competing for our attention. And studies have shown that you have 30 seconds to get someone's attention. Now, that's not all the time you have, but that's the time you have to grab their attention. So they ask the question, tell me more, which are the three most beautiful words in the English language, not I love you. So, and that's if you have a visual. If you don't, it's 7 seconds. So how do you grab somebody's attention? Well, there are all kinds of ways. You can start off with a question or an anecdote or a quote or a detail or a description, or maybe a counterintuitive lead where you think you're going in one spot, but you go into another. These are just ways that you have to grab someone's attention. And that's with that first line or your lead. Another piece is the news hook. When you're pitching to an editor, and Andre will talk to you a little bit more about what he is looking for when he's accepting things for his page, but you have to answer some central questions. So what? What is the public interest in this? Why me? Why am I the person that's the best person to be making this argument? And why now? That's the news hook. Why do we want to hear about it now? And everything has to be timely. Now, when you're writing about Asian American issues right now, there are so many news hooks. You have, of course, the AAPI anti-hate organization and what is going on now. You have the fact that there was an act in Congress that was put through. There are all sort of ways that you have to get into the news cycle. But you sometimes can't depend on a news that's in the news. You don't want to wait around for it. So there's ways you can get into it from pop culture hooks, a movie that's coming out. We saw when the movie Crazy Rich Asians came out that so many people wrote about how it is showing Asian Americans in a different light. You have holidays, anniversaries, an important anniversary in your community, a new report, the seasons, data that is being released, a report, trends, all of these things. And you have to be very strategic about it because some of the issues you're writing about may not necessarily pop up in the news. There is a power in the news hook, which is why I pay attention to that when I work with folks, which is that the people that you see all the time in the paper or on TV don't wait around. They grab what is in the news. We call it absorb, bridge, and sparkle. You absorb what's there, you bridge it to what you want to talk about, and then you sparkle. And that's how public intellectuals do it. And you can do it too by using the news hook strategically. Then is the argument. Now, an argument, that's what you're arguing for or against, and it's usually built around 3 points. Say if I'm making an issue on diversity and I feel it's a good thing, I might say it's the right thing to do, but some people might not be persuaded by that. So I might make another argument that it is good for the bottom line, that studies have shown you have to be prepared to serve a diverse global community. And the third way I make that argument might be because it's history. We are going to become a majority minority country, so you can't stay in the way of history. So when you're making your argument, make it different ways because you're not going to be able to grab all of the audience with one particular way and change their minds. And that's backed up by evidence, whether it's stats, videos, as we have seen lately, videos are very powerful evidence, reports, research. You may use literature, history, logic, evidence, the building blocks that we all find credible, even if we disagree on the interpretation. A powerful one is personal experience. Do not discard it. It draws you to people. And the pieces we're going to go through have very powerful pieces of personal experience as evidence. The next part is the to be sure. That's very important. That's when you anticipate the counter argument that your opponents will make. And you put it in there. Now, why would you do that? Because you want to be fair-minded, or at least appear to be. And you also want to frame their disagreement the way you want to. Don't let your opponent frame it. You bring it up before they can, and then you frame it in the way that you want to. That's very powerful and very important. And it's really good if you're writing something to go over it with a friend or an editor, so they might anticipate some of the counter arguments that you may not have, and they can help you be prepared for it. Nobody wants to go out into the public space, into the world of ideas, unprepared for what you might get when it comes to pushback. The last part is the conclusion. You wrap it up. And that's really, it's really a good thing. We don't want to just leave people without a sense that they can do something. So you want to leave your readers with something that's specific and doable. It doesn't have to be an action. It could be a different way of thinking. Okay, I think that it is so important. I'm actually wearing one of my sayings, which is the story we tell becomes the world we live in, because I see how powerful it can be if you tell your own story. Personally, as an African-American woman growing up in West Baltimore, I could see how my own community was stereotyped in ways that had nothing to do with my experience growing up there, until I put my voice out into the world and represented that community. That's when I got some power over it. Okay, now I want to take 5 or 6 minutes each to go over a couple of op-eds that have been submitted, and bring up some things that are really strong about them, and maybe some things that could be worked on in a way that would be beneficial for all of the listeners today. And then I want to leave a little time for some Q&A, because we have a jam-packed program and I want to make sure that we get to everyone. So if we could have the first one, which is how can we stop the violence against Asian women in America? I will give folks maybe about a minute or so to look it over, but don't feel you have to. I know you won't be able to take all of the meaning in, but just to be familiar with it in a way.
Mary, this is Monica. If I may take a moment while folks are reading the draft, I just want to remind everybody, once again, as the announcement for the webinar stated, we accepted proposals and drafts from our participants. And this is an opportunity for Mary to provide this live critique and review of the draft. So we submitted, and Mary selected 2 draft op-eds that we hope one day will be published very soon. And so this is the first one, and it's from Helen. So thank you so much, Helen, for submitting your draft op-ed.
I think you can scroll up there. Okay, I think folks may have had a chance just to at least get a little bit familiar with it. I first want to thank Helen for being brave. It's not a little thing to put your writing out there for the world to see. I want to say, first of all, both of these pieces are very strong. As I said, they are very much on the news and very much needed right now. Both of them have passion. They also make very good use of the idea of personal experience that I went over. Their news hook, of course, is terrific. They're right in the news, okay? And the writing is very clear and very strong. So now I just want to make a couple of comments, perhaps ways that everyone can use to have hints when they're doing an op-ed. First of all, you notice that Helen put a headline on it. Now, oftentimes when it comes to a paper or an outlet, a news organization, they will put their own headline on it. But I do think, as Helen did, it is a very good idea to put one on. One, you have a little bit of control, but two, it actually forces you to focus. I feel that if I can't figure out a headline and say what I wrote about in a few words, that probably means that my piece needs to be more tightly focused. Because the biggest mistake that many folks who are starting out make is that they want to put all of their knowledge and ideas into one piece, when really it might be broken up into 2 or 3 op-eds. So that is something that I think is very strong. 2, when you're writing about something that many people are writing about, you have to figure out what is your aha point of view. What is the thing about it that makes it really special, that an editor will say, okay, aha, this person needs to be writing about it. In Helen's case, I believe I found one on the second page when she says that she is a holistic health professional. And that is her expertise. And I actually think that she could have even emphasized that a little bit more. She is, I see, a member of a coalition of organizations that have been working together since the COVID pandemic with supporting members, okay? So she has that piece. So since her thesis is that Asian Americans aren't thought of as whole personalities of all the things that they are, railroad workers, restaurant owners, that she can use that maybe in the lead, as a person who works as a holistic health professional. I see that we aren't really thought in the Asian American communities of the whole of our expertise, of our professions, of ourselves as people. So I would lean on that as your aha point of view. Okay. I also think that I don't think it's acknowledged here that there has been a law passed, which I think, as the news cycle goes on, you have to acknowledge the things that are done. So not act like nothing has been done, but perhaps mention that there is a law, but that laws are not enough. Because some people will say, well, they'll look at it and say, well, we have a law now. Well, you can bring, that's that to be sure, to be sure there is a law now that is focused on these issues of violence, but the law is not enough. So you're meeting that objection head on and then moving on. I also, we talk about show, not tell. And when you talk about all the things that Asian Americans have done, maybe a couple of examples of a name or a detail of somebody, a scientist, that has discovered some cures or some treatments for COVID, even as people are getting attacked for being carriers of COVID. Okay. I also think that the call to action is strong. If you're an Asian woman, a woman, or anyone feeling the column, I invite you to be part of the movement. That is a very warm invitation. It's very inclusive, and it goes along with the tone of the piece. And you're saying, that's the call to action that's good in the sense of you're not just presenting people with a problem that's so big. You're saying you can do something about it if you go to your local organizations. You can be part of the solution. So overall, as I said, I think this just needs a few more tweaks to acknowledge what's happened, but to say it's not enough, and to bring strengthen that expertise you have and bring that in there as a holistic health professional, which makes your voice triply strong. You're an Asian American woman, you're a holistic health professional, you've been on the front lines, and this is what you see. Very nice piece. And I'm going to go on to the next piece. I want to give that some love. And then I'm going to ask the writers if they have a question, and then the overall audience if they have one. I'm one eye on the clock. I know we have about 10 minutes. Okay. The second piece, racial gaslighting amidst anti-Asian hate. Jennifer, thank you so much. If folks could take just about a minute or a minute or so and familiarize themselves with it so we can talk about it. I think you can scroll up a bit. Okay, while folks are finishing up the reading, I will start. Again, a very strong piece. Thank you, Jennifer. We have the personal experience. When I read some of these anecdotes, I thought those will grab folks. The whole sense of the gaslighting issue, which has been something that folks talk about. It comes from a movie, of course, that movie, Gaslighting, very impactfully written. Also, the use of data. We talked about evidence and making an argument different ways. And you brought in the personal experience, but you also look at the data and say how it can be misleading. You know, that the data that drops, it doesn't account, it only accounts for criminal offenses, and it doesn't account for other things, other violations. So you bring up, it's a combination of using your data as evidence, but also a to be sure. If folks will point to evidence things and say, oh, look, it's going down, you can say, well, actually, if you delve into it, that's not the way it is at all. Very good use. Also, I love the graph alongside this momentous step toward addressing and preventing violence. You know, we need a culture change where you really sum up your argument. In fact, I find it stronger as a kicker, or the last piece, because in the last, you introduce another therapist and author, Rizma Menachem, somatic abolitionism and freeing oneself from white body supremacy. That kind of took me out of it a bit. I preferred your voice, and I like that next to the last graph. So Jennifer, I would say trust your own voice on that. And you already have so much data on there. A couple of things. We have to watch when we're talking about things to watch out for jargon. Now, jargon has a negative connotation. It's not, it's shorthand. If you're in a room of people that really know the same stuff that you know, it's a way of getting to it. But if you're trying to reach a broader audience, when you introduce things, sayings or technical sayings or terms, it's a little off-putting. And in the first graph, you say a recent webinar event with NAMI, North Carolina. I don't know what NAMI stands for. And if I'm an outside reader, I would say, what is that? So just the first time you mention something with initials, say what it is. Don't assume that folks will know, okay? And then I like, as I say, the personal experience. It's really excellent. But again, sometimes you have to watch, like when you say a law was passed this past week, you don't know when this is going to appear or be published. So don't, time things, say this happened Wednesday or this week or whatever, because you might submit it and it may not be published for another couple of weeks. So kind of stay away from terms like that that will date it. Also, we talk about the Cary Police Department. Not everybody will know that Cary is in North Carolina if it runs, say, in the Atlanta paper or in Washington Post or something like that. So as I said, just be careful to make sure that everything is explained so you won't send your reader off saying, where is this? What does this mean? But overall, as I said, and also as I said before, I like the next to the last graph because it is your voice and you're giving people a strong conclusion. And I really do like that. And nowhere really do I see you say much about your own expertise that I found out about when I'm looking at your little bio at the end. You can mention in there that your own, where you are, as someone who is coordinating the Youth Mental Health Collaborative, I see the damage that this is doing for young people coming up. Don't shy away from expertise that can help you make your point, okay? I know we're all trained that modesty and humility are wonderful attributes, but at the same time, we have to know sometimes if our expertise is going to make us make our point in our op-ed, by all means, don't hesitate to use it. You don't have to, but so I know we started a couple minutes late, so I'm going to try to take just a few more minutes. First, to ask if Helen or Jennifer want to unmute and either have a comment or a question, and then we'll also take general questions for about 5 minutes from the from the group, from the listeners.
Hi, yes, this is Helen Shi. And first of all, I learned so much from Mary. I really appreciate that. It's a great information that we should all digest and learn how to write better. My question is about personally myself, growing up in China and also living in the US, I definitely have this conflict all the time, how we sort of play the role of humbleness, right? Because in Asian culture, it's all about putting other people first and put ourselves last. So you can see both pieces, we put ourselves really at the last. So we're trying to see how, because when we throw ourselves to the front, sometimes we're being criticized or saying that, are we me first again, that kind of mentality. So how do you play that, that tricky balance? And where do you put yourself, in different pieces?
Well, I think of it is using my expertise, not bragging, but is it going to help me accomplish what it is I want to accomplish? Whether it is helping the people with whom I work, and both of you work with people in your organizations, or to make my point. So I think if we use it not just as, if it can help you accomplish what you want to accomplish, as opposed to just saying, I'm a this, the reason in both of these cases, I brought it up because what it is that you do has to do with the point that you are trying to make. So to divorce it from, all the things our parents and culture taught us, and I'm a very, shy Catholic girl, school girl that was taught all of those things. But sometimes when I am writing, I put myself outside myself, like it's a different personality, like the person asking this big wig, these embarrassing questions. Well, that's not me. That's Mary C. Curtis, the journalist. And that helps a little bit because it helps you realize that you're there to do a job. And it is not about you, but it's about the communities that you are representing. And if it can help you make your point, then think about using it. It's something you can hold in your back pocket. You may not want to use it all the time.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much, Mary. This is amazing.
Well, thank you. They are both very strong. And I want to say the writing in them there is very, very readable, very beautiful, not wonky, very relatable. You had me very interested and rapt. I know Andre is more, like I said, he is now accepting the pieces, but I used to in my jobs as editors at places like the New York Times, and both of these are, I was very impressed, and I so appreciate it. And by all means, they're very close to being finished up and pitched, and I want to see them, and I want you to give them to me so I can share them on my social media feed.
Thank you, Mary. We have about 2 minutes to the wrapping up the session, but may I ask, so I do see a couple of questions in the Q&A in the chat. So let me just translate them and make it quick. Mary, we have one quick question on how long should an editorial or an op-ed or a letter to the editor like these be?
Well, it depends, but now more outlets, because of space limitations, go to shorter than longer. Most are not longer than 1,000 words. Some outlets like The Atlantic are longer. I would encourage people, I'm going to put in the chat the Op-Ed Project, which I work with as a senior leader, their website. and as long as my own, well as my own email and my own Twitter feed. And look on the Op-Ed Project's website, because on there are tips to pitching, plus there are contact information and criteria for many organizations, because they all differ. Some, like the San Francisco Chronicle, they like things very short. I think 550 to 600, very short. Others are a little bit longer. So I would definitely say to look, and it gives some, also, I wasn't able to say much about pitching, but we have some of that information there. And we also, if you want to take a further, we do these 45 minutes, which Lily took one, and we do longer ones. I just finished doing a 2-day session for the Organization of American Historians. And we have information on the Op-Ed Project's different programs on site. And I put my email there. I would be happy to answer any other
That's
queries
great.
from
And
folks.
just a public announcement, Jennifer has put all the links that Mary just mentioned in the chat room, so you can go ahead and take a look at the links. I think many of our listeners and participants are like me. We have so many opinions and thoughts and reactions from these recent events, from what happened in Atlanta to the attacks on the seniors and elders in the Asian American community. If you have thoughts about writing something and want to share your thoughts, take a look at Mary's website. There are other additional resources and opportunities for you to get more training and more support and feedback, like what we just did with Mary's session today. So Mary is available, and she's been such a great mentor and supporter of reaching out and expressing your voice in the community. Mary, one last question, and quickly, because I know I hope we will have you back, because there's so much to talk about. Do you recommend submitting to your local paper versus national paper? How do you decide where to submit?
It depends upon the topic. I would say submit to the things that you like to read, and get familiar with their style. And that would be terrific. Don't necessarily think automatically New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. If it's a national issue, fine. But if it's a local issue, your local paper, you might have a much greater voice into policy and the politics of what's going on. So I would say, don't ignore that. At the same time, if you feel like it's a national issue that perhaps USA Today would be interested or whatever, then by all means, I'm not discouraging you from going for that. The folks who are on the panel have done a combination of that. And, also letters to the editor can be impactful. If you see something in the paper you don't agree with, generally a paper won't run an op-ed answering another one, but they will certainly run a letter to the editor. There are so many ways you can show your thought leadership, and to see if your local television station has guest broadcast editorials. Think very creatively and imaginatively.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much, Ms. Mary Curtis. And it's an honor to have you here. And I hope we will have you back as a guest again and have more opportunity to engage with members of the AAPI community.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed being a part of this. And please, you folks in your organization, working with Lily, all of this, it inspires me, because what we do, it is hard. It's hard to put yourself out into the world, and we need to support one another. So look at folks in your organization as being your support system as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Now we will move to our next speaker, Ms. Melissa Green. Melissa is with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And since Hardy has already introduced her, I will keep this short. Melissa, it's great to have you here. And I think you're, like me and Lily and folks, with the recent happenings, there are just so many thoughts and ideas and opinions that we want to share with the world about what is really going on with AAPI community. How do we feel and fare within the broader social fabric of the United States of America? And so Melissa is here today to give us a sense of, from her experience, why is it so important to reach out? So Melissa, if I may turn to you. And Melissa, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And I just want to say thank you to the UCA Planning Committee for putting this together and for encouraging more Asian Americans to put their voices out in these venues, including op-eds and other ways. So as the the Recruitment and Communications Deputy Director for Clinical Scholars. I'm actually based in North Carolina. I'm at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I have the pleasure of working with healthcare providers like Lily and the members of the Youth Mental Health Initiative to help sharpen their skills as health equity leaders. And as you know, as you think about what are the top skills and characteristics of leaders, leaders are self-aware, they're courageous, they're strategic, they're adaptable, and they're also able to share their voice and their experiences and communicate to a broad audiences. So to educate people, but also to change minds and change behaviors. And this is important to think about because your stories can help change minds and change behaviors, given all of what we're talking about. What brings us together today is to change the current circumstances and anti-Asian hate. I also want to just share, as I think about, leaders, we tend to think about leaders as these folks who have fancy titles, but each of us are leaders, whether we are leading with these fancy titles or we're leading inside organizations or outside of the organizations. So keep that in mind. Each of you are leaders. For an organization like UCA, it's important to share data and information, like who attends webinars, what kinds of things are happening, but also to help share stories and reach different audiences using social media, using their websites, using media coverage, fact sheets and reports. But each of you are part of UCA. And so I encourage you to think about the stories that you tell, the stories that you have. We heard some great ones from Helen and Jennifer. And I think everybody has a personal experience and multiple stories to share and tell. So there are lots of different ways or mediums to share your story. And I just want to remind you of those different ways, including the ones that we've just heard about. So, social media, specifically pitching an idea to a reporter or responding to a request from a reporter. And then of course, op-eds are great ways to tell your story. And each of these methods, I would say, are valuable, and it's good to consider a combination of these different methods to share your story and your experience. Obviously, in social media, you have your own account. You can share that pretty easily, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, to the people that are already connected to you. And then when we think about pitching an idea to someone like a reporter or responding to a request because someone contacts you because of your position in an organization, or they somehow already have heard your name or maybe seen your story shared on social media. That's a great way to share your story as well. One thing though to kind of keep in mind is that, you could spend 20, 30 minutes with a reporter, but the control of what ends up in an article or what ends up in a news interview or a news clip is up to the interviewer. So that might end up being just a few minutes or a few sentences, and it might not be the most important piece of your story that you wanted to tell. So I would say that while it's good to do an interview, that you have more to say. You have more to say about your story. And so, we're talking a lot about specifically sharing stories and op-eds. And I would say that that's a great way to convey your story and make sure that it's told in your voice and not interpreted or reinterpreted by someone who has a different perspective. It's also a way to share your story within your network and also within new networks beyond yourself. So we've got some great feedback already from today from Mary and the two stories that she was able to review. And I will say that many of the clinical scholars in our program have participated in the op-ed workshops and have found them immensely helpful. So I'd encourage you to participate in those workshops. They're pretty detailed, as Mary said, the 2-day one, if you have the time and the resources for that. And also there are great resources that we found useful on the op-ed website as well. So as I think about why you should participate in sharing your story in an op-ed or some other medium, there are at least 2 reasons that come to mind, but just given the time, I wanted to share those. And, I think about UCA's mission, which is to educate and advocate for Chinese American communities and really to engage more Chinese Americans in civic engagement. And sharing your story really is part of civic engagement. of course, you should and you can vote and sign petitions and participate in activities. Those are great things to do. But you can also help UCA be a stronger organization, or whatever organization you're a part of, by sharing your story with your network and with other networks as well. Your story can help educate other Americans about Chinese Americans, and help grow the UCA membership. Can also grow allies of UCA, and maybe an additional support for UCA as well, whether that's financial or other kinds of support. A second reason that that you should consider sharing your story is, there's a lot of misinformation, stereotypes out there, and sharing your stories is one way to help rectify that misinformation. So I'll just share my own, from my own experience as a woman who's biracial and from New Mexico. My mother is Mexican American, my father is African American, and when people ask where I'm from, they don't expect to hear New Mexico. So there are a lot of presumptions. People presume there are very few, if any, African Americans living in New Mexico. People presume that all Mexican Americans are first generation, or that New Mexico is part of Mexico, and folks are amazed by my English proficiency. I think that many Asian Americans can relate to some aspect of those presumptions, and really telling our stories is vitally important for educating and advocating within our communities. So,
Mary, Melissa, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Melissa, no, thank you so much. That's been great.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of coming up to the end of your session. I wanted to maybe bring up a couple of questions I'm seeing.
Okay.
I think one, and then if I may kind of reframe it a little bit, and that is, we live in a world with so much content, right? There's so many pieces written all the time. There's a lot of competition. I feel like for first-time writers, or for those that are, just kind of expressing what people may think as a personal view, what do you say to someone who is hesitant about sharing his or her thoughts and kind of opinions, and saying, well, how do I know if it's not already been said? Or how do I know if other people wants to read it?
I think that's a really good question. I would say that, there are probably stories that are similar, but everybody's experience and story is unique and different. I also think of like the Voltaire quote that perfection is the enemy of good or great, and that it's important to get feedback from friends or colleagues or family about your story, to check your grammar or to make sure that it's clear, to help clarify it. I mean, the best story doesn't just come out of somebody's head onto paper perfect. It has to be massaged and edited just in the same way that we were that Mary took us through the process earlier today. So I would strongly encourage folks to think about the story that they want to tell. It does probably also mean figuring out where to present it in terms of time and context, as Mary shared earlier.
Great, thank you so much. And Melissa, again, it's been an honor and wonderful to have you here today. I hope we will continue to work with you. I know you have been supporting Lily and other UCA colleagues on the Youth Mental Health Project with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So it's been wonderful to have you. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. It's wonderful to have our two keynote speakers today. And again, if you are like me, who are very new to the concept of an op-ed or a letter to the editor, there are additional resources, and certainly we hope that you will do a little more research and give it a try. And please do reach out to UCA or others to get more feedback and resources and support on your writing and expressing your opinion. Next, we would like to move to the panel segment of our webinar today. Tim, if I may ask you maybe to put up kind of the main slide. Perfect. We have with us Mr. Andre Jackson, who is the opinion editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Also Luca Wong and Lily Chen, who many of you may know already, who recently just had their op-ed pieces published. I know they all both have extensive life experience and careers, but this is a very unique opportunity and a unique experience for them to get their published op-eds. So, we have kind of the two sides of the story. Andre, who is the opinion leader and thought expert and leader at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who selects these pieces, and then Luca and Lily, who, hopefully that, are the trailblazers and set the shining example for us to follow. So if I may bring up the 3 panelists. Can we make sure Andre, Luca, and Lily are sharing their video?
Yes, their video is on.
Okay.
I think we're all here.
So Tim, if it's all right, if it's all right with you, let's have everybody's headshot. Can we do a panorama page and have everybody's headshot together? So rather than sharing your screen. And again, if folks want to look at their biography, it is available as in a link in the chat. So please definitely take a look. Okay, so so Andre, thank you so much, and it's great to have you join us. So I feel like this is our kind of behind the scenes moment to hear firsthand from an opinion editor. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is the most widely read print publication in the Atlanta area, with a long history of thought leadership and contribution to the community. So you, as the person who selects, the op-eds and what to present to your readers, can you maybe back up and talk a little bit about what do you do, and how do you see your role as the opinion leader? And then also, how do you set your priorities? What do you look for and how do you do then select these opinion pieces that folks submit to your paper?
Okay. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. And thought leader, yeah, that's sort of an academic word, I guess, but I always think in terms of the next day's newspaper, the next day's website, the next week's newspaper, the next week's website. And I think of what I do in terms of running a marketplace of ideas, trying to provide a forum for people to come together, if you will, the civic square, where people can think and hopefully learn, and we can explore ideas on our pages. So that's what I try to do. As a practical matter, like most news organizations these days, we are pretty swamped with submissions. There are a lot of channels, there are a lot of outlets, there are a lot of people to write. Our staff resources are not unlimited. So I walk in every morning to probably about 100 to 150 new email. And many of those, probably a tenth to more, some days a quarter of those are people submitting op-eds. And I, as a practical matter, I get to them as soon as I can. But that said, there are some folks who will email in the morning, send along their piece, and they expect an answer from me by the end of day, if not noon. And sometimes it takes longer. So I say that to say, be patient in your query, be persistent in your query. Ms. Chen, one of the things that made her stick out in my mind was she was pretty persistent. She kept, she submitted her piece, and I didn't respond in sufficient time. So she said, hey, very politely, I sent this in, and basically it gave me the nudges I needed to read it. So that sort of polite persistence helps, I think, just given the workload of most any journalist or opinion editor that I do these days. In terms of what we look for in pieces, again, within the range of that marketplace of ideas, I try to look for diversity in pieces and diversity of thought among the pieces that we get. I know our audience pretty well, and I look for pieces that some things they will agree with, some things that may challenge them, or some things that hopefully will enlighten them. So I try to seek a diverse variety of voices. And a couple of things help with that as well in terms of how pieces are framed. One, I think it's important to know a little bit about the audience that we're trying to serve, know a little bit about Atlanta or the American South, and think in terms, as you write, think in terms of writing for that audience. We're not New York City. We are the nation's 8th largest metro area that's very diverse. But think in terms of your audience when you write. I have written for ethnic market, minority market media before, and the way I frame those pieces are different than the pieces I would frame for a mainstream audience. So that's the point I would make there. So write for your audience. And authenticity is important to me as well, in terms of having an authentic voice, telling an authentic story, being yourself, so to speak, and bringing forth kind of the passion and the feeling that you have around topics and how they affect your lives. Writing is not easy. It is hard work. It is especially hard to write about yourself and events in your life. My boss, the editor of the newspaper, told me once, I was writing a first person piece, actually. He said, when it feels too personal, he said, that's probably about when it's right. So that would be my guidance there. But it's all about stories, telling stories. And I think too often the voices of the AAPI community, it's as diverse as any, have not been told because we haven't had the pieces or the options to choose from those pieces. And I think recent unfortunate events in the last year or the last 4 years or 5 years or recent history have led us to the point where I think more people are willing to write now from that community. And it's a voice that needs to be heard for the benefit of both those communities as well as America as a whole. I mean, I think this is a country built in part on argument and arguing over ideas and philosophies and policies, and AAPI citizens certainly are part of that mix of argument and should be heard from more, in my view.
Thank you so much, Andre. So well said, and so much insight in that. Let me then move to Luca, who is a AAPI community member. But you know, she's got a great career in journalism and writing, but she recently published 2 op-eds, pieces that are more personal. And Luca, if I may ask you to talk a little bit about, you know, what was your messaging and why did you choose to kind of express yourself through an op-ed or through those mediums?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Monica. And thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody that's attending now. Yes, so I've been working in public relations and communications for about 14 years now. My first internship was 14 years ago, and this year was the first year that I really wrote for me personally. And so, you know, that's kind of what Monica's speaking to, and I thought it was really interesting what Mr. Jackson had just talked about how, like, if it feels too personal, it's just right. I would say that really resonates with me. My first op-ed that was published, you know, in chronological order was published by the Kansas City Star. And I talked about how I had my own experiences and how, you know, countless microaggressions and spaces in which, you know, I actually felt unsafe based on how I look. Some people might think, you know, that might be a new idea for some people, but, you know, I'm not immune to the racism either, being a biracial Chinese American woman. So I talked about a recent microaggression that I had at work, and it was really illustrative to me as in terms of, you know, they assumed that I was first generation, and they called me a mutt because I'm multiracial, biracial, or 2 or more races, what I would mark on the census. You know, and I think that's incorrect. And I just kind of like thought to myself, well, my family lines, you know, have the same pattern as yours. So, and there's nothing dirty about being Chinese or multiracial. You know, I'm a whole human being. You know, so please accept me. And I kind of wrap that into, you know, how there was the shootings in Atlanta that killed 8 people, including 6 Asian women, and how serious it is that there's a xenophobia and this assumption that Asian Americans are new to this country when we have lived here since the 1800s. And so I really talked about a lot of that history in there. And the second piece was an essay that was published by Miss Magazine, and it was a little more raw for me. And I have to say, I was working on both of those pieces for about a year since last year, you know, with all of the protests to, you know, Black Americans being killed, Black women and men. And so that's kind of the context of it. And then I learned about Vincent Chin's death, you know, on the anniversary of his death. So he died and he was beaten by 2 white men. He was a Chinese American man who, you know, they were frustrated and said that Japanese were taking their jobs. And there was a lot of shifts in the auto industry at that time. That was in, that was June 19th, 1982. And so I learned about that last June. On the anniversary of his death. And it really brought back a lot of memories for me about when I was 16 and my own Chinese American father was beaten by 3 white male neighbors. And I had suppressed that so carefully and tightly. And at that time, you know, at that time, it was 2005, we weren't talking about this kind of stuff like we are now at that time. I didn't really have the agency. We weren't talking about, you know, I didn't have the words, you know, to discuss racism. I didn't have anti-Asian racism, you know, at that time, or white supremacy or anything, or, you know, anything, any words that we might talk about now. Yeah, so that is what that one is about. And I basically just took my own experience and put it within the larger context of what's happening right now. And the timeliness piece of that is like, you know, that could be any of our fathers, that George Floyd, you know, any of these men who are Black and Asian men who are being killed, you know, could be any of our fathers. So it's really a piece for me as an American daughter, you know, just saying like, look, you know, if they were silenced and they weren't able to speak, you know, or if they were speaking and they were silenced, you know, now is the time that, you know, I'm going to speak anyway, and I'm going to speak up and to share this about my own personal experience, which is not something that I had shared before. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think they were both great pieces. And just a quick note, Jennifer has also very kindly put the links to those pieces in our chat, so folks can take a look. You know, going back to Andre's point about authenticity, being personal, I felt like, you know, your emotions and how you thought about these things and kind of your anguish and your reflections came through so clear and loud and clear through these pieces and make it so authentic and so powerful. You know, so I thought, you know, congratulations, and they were great pieces. And I really think they contribute and provide a new voice into, you know, what is kind of happening in the public conscious right now. So thank you, Luca.
You're welcome.
Let me now move over to Lily. Lily, you know, you also recently had a piece, an opinion, an op-ed published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Andre's paper. So I'm going to pose the same question to you first, and then maybe we can ask Andre to comment a little bit about that, on what was his thought process when he first saw you. You know, Lily, I know you have a different career, right? One of public service, of helping people, but not a journalist, right? Even though we all know you're a great communicator. So talk a little bit about your piece. You know, what were you trying to say? What was your messaging? And why did you choose to write an op-ed?
Thank you, Monica. I feel really honored, privileged with such an incredible panel and expertise, including Luca and Mr. Andrew Jackson and Melissa and Mary. So that's the first thing, is my gratefulness that without many people who help, including you, Monica, and Changfu, I don't think I will be able to publish. So, but I will go back to Mr. Jackson, say that authenticity, like you said, I think the point that I really felt like I wanted to say something that felt deeply inside me is when the anniversary of the pandemic, because I was talking to a friend on a bike ride, they're saying that this past year has been incredibly difficult for everyone, because I'm also a nurse educator, I'm a nurse and a mother of 5 children. And so we're community organizer, as you all know. Hello, UCA friends and the friends of UCA. I think that that my own daughter experienced in her classroom, that the teacher mocked her classmates, say Chinese virus, when she started to cough. Her friends started to cough, and then my nurse friends were doing her job in the hospital, was told go back to China, and she was trying to help the patients. And I have another nurse friend working in the ICU. 20 out of 29, 20 of them quit, and she stayed on. And then right now, with my friends, we're vaccinating America. We're doing all our jobs, and also on the civil level, past year, it just reflects, ever since the pandemic, I was in China the December before the pandemic declared. My parents were in the 80s, and then I came back. We right away started to educate the community. Melissa, I remember I asked you to recommend an expert. So you recommended epidemiologist from UNC system. So we started educate our community and African-American community and address the mental health issues, working with Justin Chen and Paul Lee and Helen actually. So, and then we also doing all kinds of work in last May, and we did the Food of Love and just trying to serve the community despite of the anti-racial, anti-Asian hate and all these terrible things happen to our community. So I just felt like, you know what, I just felt like I had to say something. I have to share who we are. We are not Chinese virus. We are not, definitely not a spy. And that's another issue, another time. There's so many Chinese American scientists are being wrongly accused, put into prison and put into, you know, very compromised situation, not comparable to the mistake they made, right? And also, I'm also working in the youth mental health, as you all know, some of you know, and then it is very detrimental. Why is it we need to address this? Not only is this not fair, that's not America, also it damages the mental health and also especially the children. So that relates to identity. So anyway, so that was my a little bit the reason I wanted to do, but I have no tools. I didn't know how to do it. So I was very fortunate that clinical scholars offer media training. Melissa actually especially said, Lily, you should go to this, go to this. So I went to an op-ed training with Mary. So then I was very fortunate that Mary was able to help me, Melissa, and then you, among others, so that I was able to edit my piece and then I submitted it. I just felt like I want to define my own story, define our own identity, not be defined by someone else. Like Melissa said, if you were interviewed by the TV station or anywhere, even the Chinese media, the story came out, it's like, what? You know, I'm sure that some of you have that feeling. So that way, I want to thank Mr. Jackson tremendously. You're being very responsive, extremely professional and supportive. You did not change a word of what I wrote. I love the title that you kind of modify a little bit. So I just hope that, you know, as a Chinese American immigrant, that I want people to know our stories. I want our children to develop with health and emotional health and physical health and also happiness. And also I want to continue to serve the community. And so the logo or the motto we used last May is combat hate with love. And I still will want to be reminded of that. So as we fight for justice and racism, let's not forget to continue to serve our community, whatever role that you have, and at the same time, and make your voices heard.
Yeah, great. Lily, you had a great messaging in your piece, and I completely agree. And you really spoke to kind of the social consciousness, right, of, you know, how the community is feeling and responding with a lot of these events, but they're taking a very positive approach. So I know you are super thankful to Andre, and Andre has been great for, you know, coming onto our panel to talk a little bit about, you know, what he does and his leadership and his paper. But Andre, maybe we can focus a little bit on what Lily's piece. So now that Lily kind of has given her story, so then she submitted the article to your paper. Can you then take it on from there? Tell us then what happens. What is your process?
Okay. Well, I've always been told that a sense of timing is important in life. So it helped that the timing was great on it. It was coming up the anniversary of a pandemic that changed all of our lives. And it was a voice that we had not heard from much. I mean, we had for much of that year a president who vilified a community, speaking of the China virus. And I grew up, and Lily and I have talked about this a little bit. I have some healthcare workers in my family who, and folks who were in the hospitals while all this was going on. And I said, well, wait a minute, you know, disease doesn't make a distinction between people or continents even. So the timing was great on the piece. And I liked very much her viewpoint that she brought, her own experiences. She touched on her own work, mental health, physical health as a nurse, and I hoped that our readers could relate to that. There are some pieces, frankly, that I pass on that make good points, but they come from a place of anger or even, I'll say, enmity or hatred. And I think sometimes righteous anger has a place, and but I think looking again at the person who's going to be on the receiving end of the piece, or hopefully will read it, I think there are pieces that I have passed on that basically point fingers and say, because of you, X, Y, and Z, you have hurt me. And I think the pieces that work, the pieces that achieve results, which should be I guess you can write to make yourself feel better or to vent or get things off your chest, but I try to run pieces that will force people to think or lead people to think, and hopefully kind of be in some small way an impetus toward change. So that was one thing I liked about Ms. Chen's piece. Well, actually, one of several things I liked about it was that hopefully it made people think and see her as a human being. I deal with folks pretty much every day who don't see certain groups, including folks who look like me, as either their equal or either as human as they are. And I say that frankly. Thankfully, it's only a few folks I deal with, but I think there are still some hills to be climbed in terms of the American experiment toward all of us truly being seen as just Americans, no matter where we came from or what we look like or our political beliefs or what have you.
Great, thank you, Andre. I know we're kind of at the end of our session, but if I may kind of abuse my power as the moderator, we could go over just a couple of minutes because I see there are maybe one or two questions in the Q&A that I will address to our panelists, and then we will ask Professor Chang-Fu Chang to then close up. But I do recognize that we are technically at the end of their hour, and so before people dropping off, I do want to thank the heroes behind the scenes, so Tim He, Yuan Wen, Jennifer, and everyone else who have helped to produce this web session. And honestly, without our great web experts and technicians, we really can't pull any of this off. So in addition to thanking our speakers and our panelists today, we also want to thank those that have worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Now, I do also recognize that want to just highlight that we have a lot of resources and information in the chat. So before you go, please definitely remember to copy those information. And then finally, this session is recorded, as with all UCA sessions, and we will make the recording available on the UCA channel on YouTube. Now, let's go into the final Q&A session with Andre and Luca. If I may segue to Luca really quickly. You know, Luca, we talked a little bit about you, or you mentioned, you know, this is kind of the first time you're sharing a personal piece or two personal pieces, right? And I know for many writers, this is a huge challenge, and it certainly is for me. You know, having a science background and a social science background, write a lot about from a third person, very objective, but, you know, not about me, right? And I think that's how many of us approach writing and how we express ourselves. How did you overcome that challenge? And if I may just give you about 3 minutes, to keep it short, to be mindful of the time, but tell us a little bit about how to decide to take that extra step. And was it challenging, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, sure. I think it's something that I felt really strongly about. You know, I had a really visceral, physical response to learning about Vincent Chin's death amongst, you know, all of what was going on last year. You know, I think I just cried a lot. And I wrote something immediately in that moment. And I wrote it in my iPhone notes. And it took me a year to kind of work that essay and be okay with somebody else reading it. I literally only had my sister read it. And, you know, I did graduate from journalism school because I studied public relations within journalism school. And I asked the dean to read it. And she was the one person I trusted with this very sensitive story. And, you know, it was that personal to me. But I think it's really important to speak up and say that, look, you know, yes, the direct violence impacts the direct person that it's impacting by, but it impacts so many more people that, you know, people might not consider. And that, you know, this is really systematic. This isn't a one-off situation. and that this is really systematic and intentional and institutionalized, and we can change that. It is preventable. And you know, there's a lot of information that's out there that is really useful for people to kind of, you know, come to that reason and logic as well. You know, we're all human, and this is our country. We belong here.
Thank you, Luca. Again, I mean, when you make these statements, so powerful, and it's so great to hear them from you. Lily, my final question to you is, you know, English is not your first language. You are such a great communicator, but I know for many that could be a barrier. Can you talk a little bit about your process? You know, I know, you know, practice, but, you know, how did you overcome, or how did you, you know, what advice would you give to another first generation immigrant who, you know, may have a little hesitation about their English expression ability? How would you help them overcome that and address that and then become a good writer and publish?
You know, honestly, I'm not sure if I'm a good communicator. I certainly not a good written English, because I have grammar mistakes. I have, you know, like, it's very challenging for me. One thing I do know is that we all have incredible stories. We all have incredible backgrounds. We all have very valid points and valid perspectives. I know so many Chinese American friends, immigrant, like in UC family. I was just amazed and, you know, amazed by their backgrounds, by their stories, or by the actual ability to write, you know. So I was honestly, I think, if I can do this, really anyone can. However, as I shared before, it does take a village. We needed to, like Luca already shared, if you have your piece, just write down. So what I did was that I really felt like I want to do something. And so I just jotted down, like that was like over a month's time by the time that it was published. So I wrote down my key points, what I wanted to share, what I want other people to know. I kind of in my mind frame my story, have a little framework, and then like a little bit added to piece by piece, sort of when I have time. And then obviously we'll need to share with someone, have them to write it. I do, you know, I like to, you know, I think hope is very important for all of us, for human being. So I do want it to, you know, despite of the difficulties and despite of the challenges, you know, we have to believe in the goodness in humanity in this country, right? This is United States America. You know, after all, that's why we all came here. So we have to trust in that. So have that piece of hope in it, as well as we're dealing with our emotions and frustrations we all have. And sometimes I don't do it very well, you know, obviously, but obviously I can't write them. So, but anyway, I think that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. And you had a great piece too. And thank you very much for trying it, and congratulations for succeeding. I'm going to give Andre the final word, quick word for our panel, but I also want to just use this opportunity to thank our panelists, Luca, Lily, for your accomplishment. And then Andre, you know, for your leadership and for what your paper is doing for such an important area, the city of Atlanta, Georgia, you know, that has really been, you know, kind of the center of so many of the conversations and discussions that we're having as a nation, right? Really all eyes are on your city, and you have been a thought leader and a great community leader in that regard. So thank you so much for everything you do for your community. And for the last word, I was wondering if you can, you know, what is one sentence you would say to someone who is, you know, a young writer, or a young immigrant, or a person of color who wants to express his or her opinion and write? What is your advice to that person?
Okay, I may do 2 or 3 short sentences. I would say first and foremost, be true to yourself and your own inner voice, and again, authenticity. I would also say this session made me think. I was in graduate school for business, of all things, and we did a lot of writing and swapping back and forth on business topics and papers. And to the point about language issues for immigrants to America, I was surprised, and perhaps shouldn't have been, that, and I went to school, I think, with people from 30 something different countries. The non-native Americans or the non-native English speakers often wrote better English than many folks who grew up in the United States. So I would leave you all with that. I wouldn't underestimate your English abilities, because I saw differently in grad school. I would rather have read something, or I had an easier time reading something written by a guy who grew up in Singapore or Hong Kong, I can think of, than some of the folks who grew up in Iowa or Minnesota.
Thank you. And thank you again to our three panelists and to all our speakers today at the webinar. And I hope you found the webinar today engaging and insightful. And I know, maybe like me, all have a lot of questions that you want to follow up on. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our panelists and our speakers, and certainly reach out to UCA if you have any suggestions or questions, and let us know what other programming UCA can help provide to the community to help spur you to generate your voice and help you contribute back to our society. And so thank you again. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Melissa, Hardy, Haipe, thank you, and Luca, Lily, and Andre. You guys have been wonderful today. Finally, as our closing remark, I'd like to introduce Professor Changfu Chen, who is from the UCA community. And I will let Changfu introduce himself. But we all work with him for a long time. He's a professor, but also a great communicator and documentary expert who has worked a lot on supporting the messagings within the community. So Changfu, I certainly hope, I would welcome your closing thoughts. And I look forward again to re-engaging and inviting our speakers and panelists back for further conversations. Changfu, take it away.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm Changfu Chen. I'm media professor for how many years? I don't remember. And I usually give 1 hour and a 15-minute lecture to put our students to sleep. Now I only have 4 to 5 minutes to finish my talk today, so bear with me. So first of all, I'd like to thank our UCA team for, as usual, putting together so many hours behind the scene to organize this amazing webinar. And a big thank you to Mary, Melissa, and Andrea for your expertise, experience, and perspectives. We feel we are not alone doing this because we have friends like you to help us along the way. A big shout out to Lily, Luca, Helen, Jennifer, and many others who have taken the lead to write to the media and share your good thoughts with us. This is exactly what we have in mind. Your touching stories, your emotions, your passion for better understanding and change is palpable. There's also much authenticity there, which is great. And you are making huge impact. Now let me kind of regurgitate a few points our great speakers have made here. And the first, that in our Asian culture, we put a lot of value on doing, not on talking. In other words, we walk the walk and we don't talk the talk. That's a virtue, but indeed we quietly and silently, we have made great contributions to this great society. But this country and this democracy is set in a way that expects us to talk. It doesn't hurt indeed. It protects us, making our voice heard. The second point I would like to talk about is we are also a humble, quote unquote, humble community. Sometimes we don't like to brag about our achievements. We have our story and we have something meaningful for the community. Let's share it through the media. There's a mindset that disagreements or conflicts are destructive, that harm relationships and community harmony. So we try to avoid them by walking away or remaining silent. And we know issues and conflicts just won't go away. They stay. Instead, they grow and get worse. It's not the way how American society or democracy operates. We see conflicts and as opportunities for better understanding and relationships. And if we confront them and find solutions. And finally, one of the ways to utilize media, of course. That's the purpose we are here today. While in America, media are privately owned, but we as citizens, to a certain extent, do own the media. The letters to the editor or opaque sections are reserved for us. They are public forum. Just like we take to the streets to protest, to rally, we use these sections in the newspapers, in the media, to tell our stories, to voice our concerns. In doing so, we fulfill our civic duty. In doing so, we engage our community, we offer our perspectives, and we make our community more inclusive and more American. Here at the UCA, we are setting up a team to help us. If you are interested, you can shoot your drafts to us. We have a team of experts to help you and to provide various support you would like to have. Thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Changfu. Thank you, everybody who stayed with us for the extra hour or the extra 15 minutes for the full 1.5 hours. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who participated today's webinar, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.